Hey, welcome to How About We Do This Together, a podcast ministry of the Northwest Christian Network. I'm Troy Dean, and my co-host is Matt Holmes, oftentimes Daniel Malaputi, and with many other speakers. It's a podcast where we ask a question and answer it at the same time. How about we do this together?
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of How About We Do This Together, a podcast of the Northwest Christian Convention. We are on day 3, which is our missions emphasis. We just finished the morning session, and you can hear I think you might be able to hear the people talking during the break behind us, but we are here to talk to our morning speakers. It was just phenomenal. I was blown away again. I keep saying that, but it's always true, I promise. And so we're just going to unpack some of what was said this morning. My name is Matt Holmes. I'm from Turner Christian Church, and with me in the room are
Jordan Bureros from the Philippines.
I'm Silas Moe from Pioneer Bible Translators.
And I'm Troy Dean. I'm the campus pastor and a professor at Bushnell University in Eugene, Oregon.
Why don't we start with Jordan? Jordan, you brought testimony, kind of an inspirational message, talking about the work that you've been doing, that God's been doing through you and through others in the Philippines, which I thought was just incredible. And thank you, first of all, so much for the testimony and for the diligence that wrote the story that you could tell us. That's a result of a lot of faithfulness and struggle, and so thank you for all of that. That was great.
Thank you for having me here with you guys.
Well, one of the things I was going to ask, Jordan, as I was listening to you share was, I love you said, when God puts a call on someone's life, you get to follow. You didn't create this sense of obedience is this, either A, it's like this dirge, I have to do it. It's kind of like my penitence or something like that, or that I would feel guilty if I didn't. You really painted it as an invitation. Mm-hmm. How do you live in that spirit?
Well, it's about the word if. If anyone would be my disciple, Jesus said, it's a decision you have to make. And you hear the call, and once you decide and then you follow, you start to see God do these things that, like his word says, beyond what you can think or imagine. And once you see that, there's no other way to go, It's just incredible to see how God changes lives, how he provides, how he does miracles when you trust him, Yeah.
I encourage anybody listening who hasn't watched the video to watch the video.
Yes.
The link will be in the show notes, and listen to the testimony so you can get the full story. But it really struck me. The most amazing part of it was stepping out. Like you said, I know where we're going. I don't know what we're doing there. I don't know what God has for us. You didn't have the plan in front of you. God hadn't shown, and you still went. And actually, Silas and I had a conversation yesterday about how you don't, even when you think you know the plan, you don't actually know the plan, right?
True.
You may go somewhere thinking this is going to happen, and God has a total different thing. But you actually didn't even have the illusion of knowing God's plan, and you still stepped out and went there and stuck it out to the extreme, to the last peso.
Yeah, well, it's kind of the thing with trust in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. He put that desire there, and he lit it on fire, and it was deep and pulling, and I had to go. There was nothing else to do. It was there, and I had to do it. And if I didn't, I was going to miss out. I'd miss half of my life, It's kind of the thing.
Okay, so talk about that for a second, because so many people who are listening, they're in different places of their faith and their journey with God. You're living in a state somewhere in the United States or in a city or whatever else. What was the kind of sense, the unpack for us, that either urge or yearn or draw or call that you felt like you're supposed to go out to Luzon?
Yeah, well, I grew up there. My parents were missionaries. I'd always been exposed to ministry, and I always wanted to go back to. Because like I said, I was about black sheep. I'd done a lot of crazy stuff over the years, been back into ministry and then out again, back again. And I got to the point where God had to discipline me at one point, and I got to the point where I had to decide which way I was going to go. Am I going to follow Jesus, or am I just going to, quit?
So were you following Jesus before you went back to Luzon?
Yeah, I
Okay.
had been already back in that, but I was ministering at a church there, and it was going okay. But then he put the desire, like I said, it just out of the blue. Everything is going as normal, and then all of a sudden I get this deep desire that I cannot shake. And so I said, this is what God wants us to do. We need to go. And my wife, she's wonderful, supports me and everything. She's like, yes, every time. We've moved 12 times in the last 4 years. Wow. For this ministry. And yeah, it's kind of crazy, but that's what he wants, and we have to follow. And the thing is, you never, it's always worth it, like you're saying. You don't miss out when you do obey. There's just everything beyond what you can think or imagine happens. And yeah, there's so many more stories about people and what God is doing. One of the young ladies that we discipled, she planted a church just during the pandemic, and she started in her own home with her family. And now there's like 6 or 7 families coming to the church she planted. Whoa. And just before I left recently, I think November it was, she had the opportunity where her little sister came to her and said, I want to talk about this a little more. And then she asked her to baptize her little sister.
Wow.
And that's, it's the legacy. It's passing on our faith. And there's the witnesses. There's people everywhere looking at us, watching us, those who've gone ahead. And when we remember that, we realize that we have to be faithful to the call of the Lord. And it's just so exciting to see what he can do. And like I said, what is he going to do? Can you imagine what he's going to do in the next 6 months after seeing what he's done?
During a global pandemic, right?
During a global pandemic.
Yeah.
If a pandemic didn't slow him down.
Yeah.
And that was the theme, actually, for this year for us, is God is moving. Everything's shut down, but God is still moving. That was kind of the thing that happened with us through this pandemic,
So let me ask you a question for... just for a person in kind of my stage of life, or being in America and being in kind of the bubble that we're in, you talked about following this call that God put on your heart, and clearly you've seen him act in ways and bear fruit in ways that validate the decision that you made. But where we have a tendency to take that too far is to just baptize our own desires and say, I want this thing, therefore God wants this thing for me, and like God really wants me to marry this person that I happen to also be really attracted to, or and we'll use it that way. And I appreciate one of the things you said. You guys spent months discerning this passion. So how did you go through that process, whether it was after you received the feeling or just in discipline before? How did you know or discern that this feeling was from God and it was where he was leading?
So a huge part of it is about prayer. That's just the foundation is communicating with your Father. And this is one thing I love about David before he was king, and he was a shepherd, is he spent all day worshiping God, like talking to his Father. He would sing the songs so that his sheep could hear him and follow his voice, is kind of the thing. I mean, Psalm 23, So for us, it was like, you just have to saturate yourself in his presence to the point that you can hear his voice speaking to you through his word, through prayer. And of course, we prayed for that for 4 months, and he wasn't leading us in any other direction, is the thing. There was no other symbol of anything. It was this. That was it. And so when he makes the path clear, it's clear. Sometimes it's not, like earlier on, and then sometimes it's so clear, and you're like, now I know this is what I'm going to do. But when we did go, we didn't know how we were going to start, what we were going to do also. So it was like, this is where we're supposed to go next. But again, we had no plan. We had no, specific direction or setup. It was all as the Lord led as well. And so it's about prayer, and it's about listening to his voice through his word, through his people. But then it's taking that step of faith beyond that and saying, I believe that your will is this, and I'm going to take that step of faith to follow.
When I've been in processes like that, the thing that's been, really helpful for me is, and by the way, that's my $100,000 quote today, is saturate yourself in his presence. It's just worth it all along. But this idea that I mean, I have like a discernment community in my life, partly because I sometimes don't trust my own inner voice. And it's not that this is not some weird, like, I'm not a good person. It's more like, okay, I really want this to be like checked in with the body of Christ, people who know me, people who've walked with me. So is there any way in which that shows up in your process? Like some people will definitely say, don't do it, you're crazy, stay here, we're your friends, that kind of thing. But is there like a discernment community around you?
Yeah, well, that's one thing that I advise everybody to have and to work in as a group of mentors. So I have several mentors around the world, actually. But also, I have a clear calling on my life. And so when it's in line with that, like bringing this message of hope, planting churches, reaching the lost, but also edifying the church, building up the church, when it's in line with that call that the Lord has given me so clearly, the path or the process might not be so clear. But because the call is so clear, it's easy to make the decision at that point once you prayed through it, maybe prayed and talked with your mentors about it. So some might even say no, but let me give you an example. At one point in my life, I was, wondering about my wife and getting her here to the States, and that's what we're in the process of doing right now. But I said to my wife, wouldn't it be crazy if, God let us do it this way? And so I said, Lord, I'm going to put the fleece out. I said, okay, Lord, if I go to the States, I want you to do everything, because I can't. We didn't have the finances. We don't have the ability to do it. You have to do everything. Secondly, I said, I would like a job in ministry. I don't want to go back to the States and just, work a normal job or whatever. And then I said, thirdly, how about if it was Hawaii? Because it's closer to the Philippines. The climate's closer to the Philippines. Lots of Filipinos, And, I just put it out there. And then I didn't even think of it. A pastor that I hadn't talked to for 10 years contacts me a few months later. He says, I know you have a ministry there. I know you're doing all this stuff, but I just wanted to let you know our church is looking to hire a new pastor. And they were in Hawaii. And they said, if you decide to come, we will take care of everything. And they would like to hire me for a job at the church. And so God answered all three of those like that. So sometimes you put the fleece out and God says, okay, I'm going to give you everything you ever asked for, everything you ever wanted, just to show you that I have a better plan. So I went through the whole thing. They were like, make a sermon, put it on tape, send it to us, send your application letter, And so I asked my wife, I said, what do you think? And, well, we can try, And so we did it. We sent the stuff and everything, and I only found out about this later when I was in Hawaii and close to coming back, that they had actually picked 5 people from all the different applications, and mine wasn't in it. They never even listened to my sermon, I don't even think to this day. But after all of the decisions they had already made, God made a way to throw the 5 out that they had already planned on to pick from and stuck me in. And so they called me up. They're like, okay, we've decided to go with you. We'd like you to come out and visit us for 7 weeks. Stay here, preach the whole time you're here, do all this stuff that the pastor would do, except for one Sunday, and also speak at the convention, the Philippine Christian Convention, the Hawaii convention in Hawaii. And so I was like, I asked my wife, I'm like, this is 7 weeks that I'm going to be gone. And we just had a new kid, he was not even a year old, my son. And she was like, no, you go do it. We will endure.
Oh my gosh.
Just so that we can see, where the Lord's taking us. And so I go to Hawaii, do the whole thing. It's incredible. We have a great time. I meet all these people. And when I first got there, I told them, I said, there's one of 2 reasons the Lord's brought me here. One is because he wants me to come and be your pastor. Secondly, it's because he wants me to come and teach you something that you need to hear and then send me home. So, whatever the Lord desires. And after the 7 weeks, we did everything. And I head home. And after a couple weeks of being back in the Philippines, they write back and they say, so we've decided and we would like you to come and be our outreach pastor. And I said, I thank you so much for the offer, but the Lord has said that we should stay here.
Oh my
Everything that I asked for, he gave, but he wanted to show me something better. And at that point in time, I think we'd only planted 3 churches so far. So we would have missed out on 8 churches.
Yeah.
We would have missed out on the 5 in the pandemic. We would have missed out on so many things. And so it is about discernment, really. And it's about the call. Is this in line with what? But then there was this one man in Hawaii who was timid. He was quiet. He shared it all the time with his friends at work and stuff. But I saw him and I was like, you got potential. And it was like I was prophesying over him. You will be standing up here one day preaching, teaching. And he's not with that church anymore, but he is gone. He went and now he's a pastor is the thing.
Wow. Wow.
And so it was, even if that was the only reason that I went to Hawaii, it was for that person, but all the other things that happened also. There's not time for those stories now, but he is preaching and he is reaching out to new communities. And I guess that was like one of the main reasons God just wanted me to go. And so the work continues everywhere.
It's powerful.
Yeah,
Jordan, thanks for sharing that, man.
Yeah, it's amazing how sometimes the hardest temptations are things that are good but not right.
Yeah.
It's good versus great. I mean, at the end of the day, there's so many great things. I mean, had you gone to Hawaii, God's not going to go like, "Oh, sorry, man, I'm not with you now."
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like God's going to still be with you.
something,
But at the end of the day, like there was something deeper, something richer, something a little bit, like again, in line with the call. Things that this deeper passion to plant churches, and could you do that more efficiently in his kingdom, being in the Philippines? Yeah, I mean, so there's this really cool thing that just. Yeah, here's exactly what I thought, and I would love. Hey, this is a good idea, and God kind of filters it through the Spirit, and then you come back and say, "Yeah, no, this is better."
And it sounds like the discernment process for that decision began so long before you actually faced the decision.
Amen.
It's kind of like, Silas, when you were talking about wanting to run a marathon and doing 0 training beforehand. And so often in my life, have decided I'm going to make this decision according to God's will. And I have spent no time saturated in his presence, no time learning to hear his voice, no training. And I want to start 0 to 60. I'm going to discern God's will in this thing.
Yeah.
I have no tools. I have no context. I have no ability, but you were prepared through being saturated in prayer and discerning God. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one of the encouragements from that too is like one of my favorite passages in Peter. He says, God has given us everything we need for life and godliness. And it's all about our knowledge of Jesus Christ. And if you don't spend that time with him, you don't learn to recognize your shepherd's voice, you could listen to the wrong voice. You could end up in the wrong place. You could end up lost or hurt or, broken. But when you spend the time to learn your shepherd's voice and you hear, you won't get lost. And the thing is, you're not leading it. You're following him as he walks along, and you're behind him, and he's protecting you, and he's leading the way, and he's providing for everything you need on that path. And it's about that that he's got it under control. And that's kind of the thing, is like, we worry too much. We have to get rid of that. Throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. Stop worrying, because God's got it under control. And then when you let him lead, it's so much easier, because he leads you in paths of righteousness. He leads you beside the still water, and you just have to keep following is the thing. You have to decide every day. It's hard. Yeah. Like he's saying, it's super hard, but once you do it, then you see afterwards, hindsight is 20/20, as they say. But if you follow Jesus, you just need to focus on him. You could be nearsighted, you could be practically blind, but if you hear his voice and you follow him, you don't need to look back. Forgetting what is behind and straining on towards the goal to win the prize.
And that's probably a good transition to talk to you, Silas, a little bit about what you're sharing, because you, again, and go online, listen to the message, because you're going to get a lot out of it. But you used kind of the ultra marathon as like an overall like motif of like what it really is like to follow God, and I love how you take this passage, the Hebrews 12 passage, and you're like, oh, and by the way, the way he leads into all this stuff is by telling you about how hard people had it in the name of Jesus.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I love how the author's like, let's run the race with endurance. And sometimes as Christians, like, we just vacuum that verse out of it and we're like, this is beautiful. Let's run the race. But then if you read read what he's been talking about, like for the past few chapters, he's like, remember all those legends of the faith? Like they were stoned. Some of them were thrown in prison. It's like, whoa, what? Hold on.
No, my favorite one's like, and it's like, run the race with perseverance. You might get cut in half.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, you're gonna get stoned. People are gonna cut open your back with like bone and rock and whips. You know,
like what kind of encouragement did this church need? The author was like, I want to talk about all these people who have been beaten to the point. Like, think about how hard their faith must have been. Like, how hard that persecution must have been. That this author's like, let me tell you about some people who've really been persecuted who went before you, and it's worth it.
Yeah.
Like, your turn.
Yeah.
Oh.
And one of the things I was thinking about as you were talking is he's calling us to what we tend to think of as like, the missionaries are the marathoners, right? But there is no Christian 5K.
No.
Right? Like he's not saying, hey,
Come
listen
on
to
now.
how
Come
hard
on.
That's good.
listen to how hard
Absolutely.
these people had it. Aren't you glad you're not them? Right? He's saying this is what it looks like. And so we're all called to marathons.
Yeah.
Now, some of us have easier terrain than others, but we're all, if we're doing it right, it's a thing we have to endure. It's a thing. I love what you said about how there's something wrong with people who do ultra marathons.
Yeah.
And from a human perspective, right, there's something wrong with people who follow the kingdom, who live out the kingdom. It's counter to everything that sin has programmed into us. So there is, from a human perspective, something wrong with us if we actually want to sign on to what the gospel calls us to.
Straight up.
And I constantly want to make it a 5K. I constantly want to make it shorter and then, stop after a little bit and go home and sit on my couch. And like, whew, that was hard for me.
Or like I run the 3K and I go like, I deserve like a big burger right now.
Yeah.
Like I worked really, really,
You
really
burn
hard.
like 50 calories. You're
Right.
like, I need 5,000. Yeah.
Well, you were talking about running and I started running, but recently in my 30s, it's because I was very out of shape and very, I'm just not healthy. And so I've had to really work hard to be able to do a 5K. It's just, the work that's involved in that. I get the end of a 5K and think, oh man, I just did a lot. Like, that was hard work. I feel good about myself. And then you talk about marathons, like, yeah.
Dude, it's crazy. I can't wrap my mind around how far some people run.
Yeah.
And I've talked to a lot of people who are, they've been following Jesus for 60 or 70 years. And they're like, my life is not an ultra marathon. Like, following Jesus isn't an ultra marathon. I'm like, yeah, but look at what you've done. Like, you've had to navigate some of the craziest cultural issues and still choose to follow Jesus every day.
Come on, that's
like
good.
you've had to be totally exhausted and still choose to follow Jesus every day for 60 years. What do you mean it is an ultra marathon? Like, you've done it.
Yeah.
I think you gotta have the desire is the thing, you gotta have the hunger, and I think that's what the commission is about.
Yeah.
Go into all the world and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them and teaching them to obey. That's like can't forget that part, because you can just keep going along, but are you passing that on is the thing. And you're talking about global outreach. We're all on the same globe. Doesn't matter where you are. This is global outreach.
Yeah.
Come on now, that's good.
I think there's this myth, and this is something I'm just really processing right now. I feel like there's a myth in Christianity that something about following Jesus or something about being a Christian in America is easier. Like being a pastor is easier than being a missionary. But I don't feel like that's true at all, because I've been both. And I just feel like, we're all in the same globe. We're all following Jesus. Every church everywhere has its own issues. And every church has its
terrain
own...
everywhere is kind of the thing.
Yeah. And I've heard so many Christians also say oh, the American church is so bad. Like those churches that you're planting or those churches that you're a part of around the globe, those are amazing. I want to be more like those people. And that's great to see principles about following Jesus that other people are doing better than you and aspire to do better. But man, I just feel like so many people are so negative against Christ's bride here in America, who is it's beautiful. Think of all the people in this room who've lived a life of ministry, who are working hard to serve the church here, and think about all the beautiful things that the church is doing. So I feel like we don't need to just chuck the baby out with the bathwater when we're ragging our own cultural issues. We need to be aware of them. We need to get better at the things we're bad at, but we can't just Yeah, I'm still processing this. This isn't a fully formed thought, so I hope you guys understand that. But man, I'm just really processing all
I think
those
a
things.
key there is like focus, though, like the old song, you know, turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full into his wonderful face, and the things of earth will go strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. If it doesn't matter where you are in the church in America or Africa or wherever, if you focus on Jesus, everything else isn't going to matter because it's going to be all about him. And once you start following him, then you won't go wrong. And you need help, of course, to do that. And you need to decide every day to do that and endure through whatever he wants you to do, whatever discipline or training you have to go through. But if you focus, like you said, you will finish and it will be worth it.
Yeah.
Well, it's so hard because, again, I think one of the things I was trying to kind of challenges us with the first night is there's just so many other idols available. And they're so enticing. We have a culture that is absolutely built on selling you an idol of some form, some way. And everybody wants to even tell you their favorite idol, right? Like they're all bringing it to you. Like we're going to post about all of our favorite idols, right, on social media. And so the challenge is this, I think the comparison thing. Until you have tasted, until you have seen, at some level, again, we're not talking about, it doesn't have to be this grand, glorious thing yet, but it's something that it gives you a chance to compare the kingdom of God and the kingdom of the world. And there's that great passage when Paul's talking about the fact that it's like, it's all rubbish compared to this. And he's still talking, again, he's not talking about the stuff you get out of it. He's still talking about a relationship with God, the incomparable, right? And so we live in a world that is always comparing, but we're comparing to the wrong things.
Yeah.
I love how Paul says, I've had it all and I've lost it all, and this is still it. Beyond what I had and what I lost, this is still it. Like, there's nothing else. There's nothing better.
You kept coming back to the idea that it's worth it, and I think that's and you were also just talking about how you have people who've run long races in their life, and they say, "Oh, it's no big deal. I haven't been." And you think, "Are you crazy?" Because I've been doing it for a couple of years, and I'm exhausted. And I don't think that's because the people who make it a long way it wasn't exhausting for them, but I think it's because if I just remember learning to run or getting in shape, the first run was the hardest.
Yeah.
And the more times I ran, the more experiences I had of realizing I can do this, and it is worth it. I feel better on a day that I've been able to get exercise and been able to get active, and the more times I realize that I can do it and it's worth it, the easier it is to do it the next time. And so that first time you really commit to say, I'm going to do this even though I don't actually know in my bones that it's worth it yet. Yeah. That first time is a powerful experience, and then the more you do it, the easier it gets to be committed.
I love that running is mentioned throughout the Bible. It's like the analogy that just keeps on giving, because when it comes to distance running and these people who have run the race of faith for years and years, they're at this point where their body, like their tendons, their bones, they're just used to the pain of running, and it doesn't hurt anymore. Like it's like they're running at a pace that is just, their body loves it at this point. But when you're first running, those initial few years, that's the crazy part. Like running fitness, when you start talking to distance runners, they measure their fitness level in terms of years that they've been running. Like, not in terms of like, oh, I've done this training program and this training program. It's like, no, I've been running for like 5, 6, 7 years. Then you can like really know a lot about a person when they say how many years they've been running. And that's like mind-boggling to me. And I think following Jesus is the same way. If you're like going couch to 5K following Jesus, that first run and that first 3 months is going to be so hard. But then in a year, if you do the same things, like if you're seeking Jesus for a year, certain aspects of following Jesus that were super, super hard at the beginning, maybe getting into the Word was super, super hard at the beginning. Now that's going to be so much easier after a year. Or sharing your faith, which was super, super hard at the beginning. You weren't sure how to do it, but then now you've got the form down and you know how to do it. It's the analogy that it just keeps on giving. I love it.
Well, in some ways, it's connected to, so often in the scripture we find this remember. Because I think the authors and God is trying to get us to have a better memory of what has actually happened, right? And you say, well, that was really hard when we went through that medical season of our life, and it was difficult. And he's like, well, and I was with you then, and I carried you through that then. So whatever you're facing today, I'm still going to carry you through, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the beauty of hope too, you know, is you're pushing towards something that is infinitely beyond anything that you could ever think or imagine. It's the same thing. So if you deny yourself, that's the thing. Let go of it. Stop worrying about it. Let God, and just follow, and you will see what He can do. And that's the mind-boggling thing, when He does something that you just cannot imagine. And then you have the hope of glory beyond that. Like everything that you've experienced here, there's something so much better even waiting for you ahead.
Yeah, this
that's
is
what
just,
you have to pass on to the people. Like, yeah.
I mean, this is just the appetizers.
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
Yeah.
All right, so we end each episode is we say together the name of the podcast, which is, again,
How about we do this together?
and so we're going to say it together, but it's tongue-in-cheek, kind of ironic, because we know we're not going to say it completely together. And so it's a part of like the messiness of what is and the hope for what is going to be.
And
right?
one of these days we're going to explain it before the podcast starts.
Exactly. So, all right, so on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3.
How about we do this together?
Hey, not bad.
That was really
Probably
good.
the best one yet.
Hey, thanks for listening today. We genuinely thank you for your time. Just pray that you would actually find ways to collaborate with others for kingdom things. How about we do this together?